So I think the belief structure was a crystal that formed around the truth of belonging. And when I say belonging, I mean both belonging in your community to other human beings,
Yes.
the Ubuntu of Africa, I am because you are, but also belonging to what I can only call the universe. I don't have any other better word for it. And I know it has a little bit of new agery associations, but the sense of I am part of this one universe. I am part of this reality, even though I might feel alone and afraid and rejected, as I did from my childhood and my bullying and whatever. It was only when I felt a belonging to the world I live in. And you can think of that as a quantum thing. You can think of it as a globalization. It doesn't really matter how people think about it, as long as you can feel belonging. Because when you feel belonging, I believe that the experience that humans call that sense of connection, we call it love, or we call it community, or care, or compassion. And that's the best bit of all of it. And the challenge I have with the church and state separation, which, of course, I am so grateful that no religious person can get in the way of my healthcare or my education of my children.
Yes.
But when we chased out the church, what we also chased out was meaning and love and connection and compassion. And I think the reason why we now got this upsurge of fanatical evangelical religions is because people have a deep, heartfelt sense, I can't just live in a meaningless, empty universe where the only thing that matters is profit and GDP growth.
Welcome to Think Bigger, Think Better, where we explore how you can apply insights from visionary leaders and the most provocative philosophers and scientists of our time to make your life and our world a better place. Here's your host, author and speaker, Paul Gibbons.
Welcome back to Think Bigger, Think Better. Today we're going to discuss a new book called The Spiritual Atheist by author and business guru. I'm using the guru word, by the way, just to annoy my guest, and my buddy Nick Jankel. Our discussion leads us to an in-depth discussion of business leadership and wanders over topics such as neuroscience, anthropology, psychotherapy, somatics, some philosophy of mind, and lots more philosophy of lots of other things. It's a great and very fun talk. But first, let me tell you where we're going with the show. Upcoming guests are James Shaw, who's a cabinet minister in the New Zealand government, Lenora Skenazy, who has a website and a book, Free Range Kids, on modern parenting culture, Jacques Attali, who is a former head of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and advisor to French President Mitterrand, Jesus Mantas, who is head of IBM's global consulting business. It's a big business. Who's going to talk about artificial intelligence in business, some of the applications and some of the ethics. So I'm really excited about all of that. I began this podcast wanting to copy Sam Harris, but I'm finding several things out. First of all, I think we can have a lot more fun than he has. His podcast has a kind of very serious and heavy tone, and I want to take the subject seriously, but perhaps not take ourselves as seriously as some of his guests do. I also am enjoying getting non-academic guests who have interesting contributions to make. So I want to stay close to my brand of philosophy and science. I also want to have people who are in the world making a difference, CEOs, cabinet ministers, social entrepreneurs, etc. So what's my brand? How am I thinking about that now? I think serious topics taken lightheartedly, the best guests in the world, government ministers, CEOs, and top public intellectuals. And as I'm sure you know by now, if you're a regular listener, it's really, really eclectic. So I'd love your support. What are the things you can do? You can tell your friends. Please, if you enjoy episodes, tell your friends and share them. Review the podcast on iTunes, and I will send you a free book by one of my guests. Support the episodes, a few bucks an episode on Patreon. Join our Think Bigger, Think Better Facebook page, where we talk about some of the things we talked about in the show. And you can also give me suggestions for guests, and you can challenge our thinking. Or subscribe to my mailing list on my website so that I can send you an email when an episode drops. On to today's show. Who is this dude, Nick Jankel? He's a complex fellow. He's Cambridge educated in the natural sciences. He's a former dot-com entrepreneur. He's an innovation guru. He's a futurist, sometimes on AI and blockchain, sometimes on lots of other things. He's got a ton to say. He runs a consulting business out of England. But he's also wandered the halls of academic philosophy and spirituality, Eastern and Western spirituality, looking for insights on how to live. And that's one of the reasons I have him as a guest on the show, because that's one of my projects, is to rehabilitate ideas from philosophy and make them practical and useful for 21st century people. So I consider this guy a brother. He's one of these great people that I feel like is a really close friend who I've not had very much time with, and I've only ever met him on social media and through social media. So I consider it a great privilege to have Nick on the show. Nick, welcome to Think Bigger, Think Better. Thanks for being here, mate.
Thank you so much, Paul. It is a pleasure to be with you.
I want to congratulate you. You know, The Spiritual Atheist, I love books with oxymoronic titles. But for listeners, I just want to say it's an amazing book. It's a tour of Eastern and Western thought, everyone from Jung to Freud to Aristotle to Nietzsche. So you get a bit of everything, to Tao Te Ching. I don't know if there's anybody you don't cover there. And you tell it through your own memoir, through your own journey, which is beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, it was a bold choice to write a philosophical book in the form of a memoir, because who am I to share my life's memoir with? But it just seemed right for this book to really show this is not just an abstracted philosophy for life that is disconnected from life. This is something I've cultivated within me through really very lived experiences from childhood, teenage years, right through fast growth entrepreneurship, technology, business, etc.
I think it's great. You know, one of the accurate criticisms of philosophy is that 20th century philosophy, particularly in the Anglo-American tradition, has become what we call analytical philosophy. And it's very arid, man, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, I think I've been into a handful of lectures on it. Can't deal with it. It just does nothing for me. It's negative. It's like a negative space of interest for me. Whereas real philosophy about how to live in your life, how to thrive, how to lead, how to love, that stuff blew my mind and still blows my mind and opens me up and helps me live, helps me lead, helps me run a business.
Yeah, and I think for listeners, that's one of the things you'll get out of The Spiritual Atheist, is that this tour of Eastern and Western thought starts with Nick when, he's a teenage boy, he's in synagogue, and his relationship with religion and how that changes, and then some adolescent growth problems, and he's doing some psychotherapy, and how that Freudian psychotherapy opens up another vista of understanding the mind, the psyche, the consciousness, and then to Cambridge. And so I won't do the reading of the book here for you, but I just want to say this tour of science and philosophy is really something not to miss. So anyway, I'm done saying nice things about you now. Now I'm going to ask you some hard questions. Actually, how you put the book into 250 pages, I have no idea, mate. That's quite something.
That was a lot of editing. That's how that got to be. And in fact, I launched an early version as just a limited release, and I went back in and I cut down a bunch of words. These days, people don't have time for big depth. I mean, depth, yes, but lots of pages. I'm very parsimonious with reading, and I will cut out pages. And so I just thought, You know what? There's a bit of personal history here that people don't need to know. Get rid of it. Great for me to have written in terms of cathartic for my own bibliotherapy, but not relevant to the narrative. Get it out.
Anything longer than 3 minutes, I think, is my ADD gets triggered.
Exactly.
3-minute YouTube video. Are we going to do a 3-minute YouTube video version of the book?
Well, I've actually just done a couple of 3-minute videos on my leadership work and my beliefs about the future of leadership and the future of work. And, it's a real craft to create a big thought in narrative form in under 3 minutes. And you're right, it has to be under 3 minutes these days for a video.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful challenge and it's interesting because these 3-minute videos take me literally 6 months to conceive of and to edit, and then my editor. And there's a wonderful saying that I remember bringing out as a keynote speaker. I do a lot of talks, and I'm usually given an hour, and that's gone down in the last few years to like 40 minutes. Occasionally I'm given 30 minutes. And then you get these sort of TED Talk style events where people think it's great to give you 10 minutes. And Winston Churchill said this wonderful thing. He said, if you want me to speak for an hour, give me 5 minutes to prepare. But if you want me to speak for 5 minutes, give me an hour to prepare, because you have to boil down and distill.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's brilliant.
In the book, I talk about my time in advertising and how interesting it was and very informative and very helpful whilst also, I think, ultimately misguided. But one of the things I had to learn was how to create a strategy for a brand, a global brand in one page, past, present, future. And I think that helped me with this ability to write succinctly.
Yes. Well, good. So let's ask you a question. So I've said to listeners that the book starts, with Judaism and religion and atheism. It moves on to psychotherapy and Freud, and then you go to Africa, and
Yes.
this is something and this was transformational for you. This is what Americans won't know this expression, but in England we call it a gap year between, basically high school and college. Nick was off to medical school at Cambridge, and I took a year in Africa. So I want to hear how this experience of the African village was transformational for you in your psychological development and your understanding of philosophy.
Absolutely. I mean, it was first of all, it was a lot for an 18-year-old, and I probably wouldn't necessarily suggest other kids go on programs. There was no support. It wasn't like Peace Corps where there's, you're basically a mini American bubble in the middle of the African savannah. It was just me in a school in the middle of nowhere. I was an employee of Robert Mugabe's Ministry of Education, and that was it. I was left for a year. And for the first few months, I really resisted it. I would spend the weekends in the city meeting other young people and
young English people, probably, right?
Yeah, exactly. Americans, English, whatever, Westerners.
Yeah.
And I just didn't, I was living on the floor in a mud hut, literally, no toilet, no electricity, candles, mosquitoes, teaching science as well, when I've never had a single day of training of teaching. And anyone who's ever taught anything knows it's not something you do without some thought and design, and I didn't have any of that. So it was a difficult, career as well moment, and first proper job as well, if you think about it, first 9 to 5, or was it 7 to 7? And a turning point happened about, I'd say 4 or 5 months into the year. I wasn't at the time massively into sport. In fact, a later chapter talks about my discovery of my ability to be in my body and to be a physical person and to run a marathon, etc. But at the time I was very heady, very academic, intellectual.
You were the fat, spotty, spectacled kid that had no friends.
Well, two out of those 4. I was the fat and spectacle guy. I didn't have spots, thankfully. I was one thing I wasn't given. I had lots of friends, but I was never sure about those friendships. It was always those boyfriends when you're boys' school, they're friends, but they tease you and they bully you, but they're friends. And it was a very difficult time.
That sort of ambiguity is very difficult, that kind of social ambiguity.
Absolutely. It's very painful.
Not really bullying, so you can't really call it out. And we really didn't have bullying 25 years ago, did we? It didn't really exist as a distinction.
Absolutely.
It was only ever physical. It wasn't psychological. Anyway, without too much of that. So what happened to you in this village?
I got invited to sort of coach the kids with sport. I did some rugby and I did some football. And the kids had a football match every weekend. And they would a school would come to them or they'd go to a school. And when I say a football match, there wasn't really a football field. There were no goals because no one had any money. But it was a bit of land and there was some kind of structured school itinerary, but don't think it's anything like we know in the West. But I got stuck in, and so rather than going away for the weekend, I'd stick around and I'd go off to a school in the back of a flatbed truck with 70 kids all in the truck and me. And, we'd score a goal and I'd dance on the pitch with people. There'd be drums. I'd go for a feast in the evening at the village where someone was boiling the maize meal with, some vegetables and stuff. And then I'd go to the local bottle shop and I'd met, women there who were, I think, of dubious virtue, as some would say, but wonderful human beings. And I learned to dance, I learned to enjoy music, and I learned to relax. And it really transformed my experience. So in hindsight, I now realize what I was learning was community, and I was learning the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which means, I exist because you exist. You don't exist as an I, a Cartesian ego, solitary. You exist in relationships. So the African way of so non-Western philosophies often have relational.
The self is the spoke in the wheel, not the spoke in the wheel. Everything revolves around the self, and the self has an independent identity. But in Africa, what you're saying is the self is defined through relations.
Yes, the self almost arises in dialogue, in relationship, which other Western philosophers and scientists have, latched onto. People like Whitehead, some of the interesting sort of continental process philosophers. But I just blew my mind. This is people who don't know me, don't have anything, like nothing. And they are light of heart and they are open and generous with me. And they They accepted me. There was never a mention of being the fat kid. There was no teasing. If there was, it was genuinely with a twinkle in the eye and a big heart. And I felt like, wow, these people don't know me from Adam. I'm just, don't forget, it was only 10 years earlier that there'd been a horrific civil war in Zimbabwe from the white government, the sort of rogue government of Smith and people, and the people I was literally with, the guerrillas in the rural areas. And it blew my mind. And it wasn't enough to fully transform me, that experience. I've been there 10 years maybe. But it definitely made me realize that Western philosophy does not have the only answers to life's biggest questions. And it's something to bear in mind when you go and work in China or Africa and you expect everyone to have the same linear idea of time as we do in the West. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. It's a different understanding of space and time and being in time. And it's just, it blew my mind, actually. It was one of those experiences that I had to unpack for 20 years before I fully got what it given me.
Well, there you go. And so you returned from there a changed man. I swear too much in this, but you were a clever motherfucker, right? You were off to Cambridge for medical school, right? You're a clever boy, right?
Though I hadn't probably done much cleverness up to then. I just swung by, but Cambridge really taught me rigor. Like I realized very early on, if I'm going to not sink in this place, I have to become a very rigorous thinker. And that stood me in remarkable good stead for the rest of my life. That was the gift, actually, of Cambridge.
So listen, we've only got an hour and we're now only up to chapter 3, so we better boogie along here. So a lot of your book is this journey, and you get to an exploration of consciousness. And I know we disagree a little bit on this from some discussions I have, but you have what's called a post-materialist view of consciousness. First of all, what is that? And then secondly, why should people who are business leaders, or why should the very clever individuals who listen to this podcast care what consciousness is? Why is that important? And what the hell is post-materialist consciousness?
Brilliant questions. Huge.
Right. We have 45 minutes just for that, right?
Exactly. Let me start with where I was at.
Yeah.
Because I was a materialist. So I went to study science, and I really believed if you can't measure it in physical reality, as in empirical measurements with a microscope, a telescope, some form of quantum sensor, it doesn't exist. And that was fine. And then over many years, I started to realize that the extreme version of that view, which is put out there by a number of what people call the new atheists and philosophers, is that it...
So who are they? They're Dawkins, they're Dennett, they're Stephen Jay Gould, they're...
Exactly.
Sam Harris. That's kind of my tribe. But anyway, carry on, mate. Sorry.
I'm not into the people. I guess I'm trying to recalibrate atheism. Yeah. And I'm saying, listen, I know as much as anyone else, I love science. I love science for telling me about cells and what happens if I eat this stuff or do this stuff, or if we hit this piece of material, what's going to happen to it. The one thing science was never very good at was understanding subjective experience. And in fact, psychology as empirical psychology, has tried to avoid it because it's so notoriously hard to create good experiment about people's feelings and their thoughts.
Yep.
And so I never really understood this. And I guess I got to a point from my own self as an individual that I kept getting depressed. I kept on having anxiety. I'd have difficult relationships because I get angry and frustrated and sad and lonely. And I'd pull people towards me, but then I push them away. And I realized I didn't have much of a mastery of my own inner awareness, which we can call our own consciousness, human consciousness. Yeah. And then going deeper, I realized that the tools I'd been using from science that I was relying on for doing stuff in the world weren't really geared to understanding my own inner awareness. And I discovered there was a science, a different form of science of inner awareness, which the Eastern philosophies have traditionally been very well versed in, although of course we have them in the West. There's a big treasure trove of wisdom around inner experience from Plato, from Plotinus, from Heraclitus, all the great Western philosophers. But anyway, I realized that philosophy, and particularly introspective philosophy or contemplative philosophy, which includes usually some form of either meditation or ecstatic experience, either getting out of your head through quietness or getting out of your head through dance, movement, drums, African style, opens up new insights that science just doesn't have the tools to get to grips with. And it's that part of our reality which I think is often missing. It's missing in capitalism because we promote profit because you can't measure purpose. And though we know purpose is important, but you can't measure it. So the tendency is to deny it or to avoid it or not really do anything. And so we get a focus on efficiency, a focus on profit, a focus on technology as speed and scale. And I think the big thing that we're all missing and is causing a lot of our political problems at the moment is we're missing space for human being. And that is what I believe consciousness is about how we feel together, how we care, compassion, connectivity. Whether you call that the dirty S word, the spiritual word or not, that's really a language issue. But I guess what I wanted to do with this book and with my own life has been to say, listen, atheism's great, materialism's great. And if I want to know about atoms, I don't meditate on it. I do research.
Yeah.
But if I want to know about why I'm feeling sad about something or why I can't seem to connect with my team, then microscopes aren't very helpful.
Yeah, there's so much I want to say there. I mean, one of the things that we're, of course, trying to do is we are trying to ground today inner experience, consciousness, and feelings in neuroscience. And that's in some way a helpful thing. You want to make the connection between brain and mind, and neuroscience is the way to make a connection between them and mind. But I find that a lot of people who try and use neuroscience in coaching and in leadership are saying things that they're trying to say, oh, your amygdala is such and such, or your serotonin levels, or your norepinephrine levels, or your, glutamate receptors, or whatever they are. And I don't think that helps. I did a really great interview, so you'll find this is funny. If you have a couple in counseling and you're trying to understand, and they're working on their marriage, and you're trying to understand, what's going wrong in their marriage and helping them to approach one another differently, talking about their serotonin levels, their amygdalas, their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it's not only not useful, it's like unhelpful. That those abstractions disconnect rather than connect. That's, I think, an example of what you're saying is that you can't really use science very easily and we're still trying to understand feelings and experience and consciousness. And that was the real breakthrough in your own understanding as a young man. Well, mid-20s, right?
A younger man. I probably didn't really have the breakthrough until my 30s. I had experiences of meditation. I had experiences in shamanic settings in different parts of the world. And I had these experiences of my awareness and my subjectivity. But it did take about a decade to try and put together what I knew from science, including neuroscience, and what I knew from my own introspective studies, but also the great wisdom traditions, Taoism, Vedanta, Sufism, these great treasure troves of contemplative science. And that's what this book is really about, is me saying, listen, guys, the war between religion and atheism is over, or religion and science. It was never really a war. Yes, of course, we want to use science for matter and material, and then we want to use consciousness studies for our awareness. But the two together must meet, because there's, in my world, only one reality. There's not a dual reality. There's one reality, one brain that shows up as consciousness when you're inside it, and it shows up as neurons and channels and astrocytes and whatever when you put it under a microscope. That's it.
So we're very cool. So now we're up to chapter 4 all the way, right? So I want to scoot forward, right? So in chapter 9 of the book, chapter 9 is kind of a summative chapter of all of your explorations of Eastern and Western philosophy, Eastern and Western psychology, some of the experience in the African village, which could be called sociological, could be called psychological. And we get to chapter 9, and here we arrive at the spiritual atheist. So why is that, from your point of view, an important enough terminology to be the title of the book, and really the apex of the book here is in chapter 9. So what's that?
I mean, great question again. I have many different titles or option. One, the early title of the book was The Atheism Breakthrough.
Okay. I like spiritual atheist better. In case you're wondering.
Well, that's what all the PR people said. So I was like, whatever. Okay, I'll go for it. It was not an easy choice because I don't use the S word very often in my work, particularly my work in organizations. I'm not even sure what it means. I'm pretty sure no one else has the agreed idea of what spirituality means anyway. So it's a very tricksy word that can get people up and down and sideways.
It's so interesting because, I did a lot of work in the 1990s on spirituality and business. That was what I was known for in the 1990s, as something like that. And so I would tell people that I were into spirituality and they go, oh, you must be into crystals or meridian or energy meridians or chakras. And no, I don't believe any of that shit. I mean, And so, yeah, it's not a super helpful word. It means so many different things to different people. And of course, there are people who might say from the traditional Abrahamic religions that you can't be spiritual without a belief in deity. You lose the whole point of the whole spiritual exercise is belief in a deity. Well, we don't think that. So, yeah, carry on.
Well, I said the exact opposite. I'd say the whole point is spirituality. And if you want to pack on some religion around it, great, but then don't tell anyone else they're wrong or start having a fight,
right?
Because it's not helpful,
right?
And actually, I'm still, just so we're really clear, I am still a militant atheist. I am literally allergic to organized religion, priesthoods, gurus of any sort. Anyone telling me that they've got some connection to this thing called love or compassion more than I have. It's like, seriously.
Those are just ego trips. I mean, those are just...
Exactly. But I'm getting flamed on social media at the moment from a lot of religious people. Very interesting as you say that. Anyway, spiritual atheist, people love the title because it's oxymoronic, but it kind of makes sense to some people. So what I mean by spiritual atheism is that, first of all, we all need a life philosophy to live. And just like a brand, just like a culture at your company, you have one whether you design it or not. That's one of the great things I used to say as a brand consultant is you have a brand, you're just not having the brand you want in people's perceptions.
Understood.
Same with a life philosophy or a leadership philosophy. You've got one, you just don't know what it is. You can't express it. You've never written it down. You've never challenged it, and you don't know. You can't express it to anyone.
Well put.
And so actually, when I do leadership work, one of the first things I try and do is surface people's de facto leadership philosophy that they're making decisions on.
Sure.
So this is the term I use in the book called bios, which was a term from the Greeks meaning a life philosophy, a living philosophy.
No, man, that's what happens when you boot up your computer. Come on. That's that little blue screen that you get before Windows starts.
Exactly. And so spiritual atheism is a bios. It's an operating system for whatever you want to then put on top. Is it relationships? How am I going to be with my kids? How am I going to be at work? How am I going to be in my own life? You know, am I going to take the pills for cancer, or am I going to do some meditation? Am I going to immunize my kids, or I'm going to try, we make decisions like this all the time, right? And the one at the moment in the corporate setting is purpose and profit. But at the moment, if you ask someone, what's the philosophy that purpose runs on? What's the operating system that your whole conversation you're having about your business purpose, leadership purpose runs on? In the materialist view, there isn't one, because consciousness is an illusion. It's an epiphenomenon of the brain, of neurons. There's no purpose in the universe. So therefore, why are we talking about purpose? We should talk about profit. So we need a life philosophy. We need a leadership philosophy. So spiritual atheism is my version of that. And to summarize it, it basically says we have two different aspects to every substance, every bit of entity in the universe.
Yeah.
We have a material side, matter, 3, 4, whatever dimensions, don't know.
Understood best through science and objective
Through science.
Yeah.
Very objective, empiricism, randomized control trials, get away from bias, get away from fatigue, get away from political ideology seeping into science, etc.
And then
we have this other aspect, which is our inner subjective conscious experience, which is the spiritual side. And basically what I say in the book is I'm what philosophers call a dual aspect non-dualist. So I believe there's only one thing in the world.
Right.
There's only one universe, but it has a conscious aspect and a material aspect.
Yeah, you could say there's only one coin, but it has two sides, if you will.
Exactly. So in fact, on the front of the book, I use the Mobius strip from science.
Yeah.
Because it's an amazing paradox, like spiritual atheism is.
Yeah.
It's only got one side. If you trace your finger around the Mobius strip, it's only got one side, but it's actually made from two bits of paper with two sides. So it's a total perfect metaphor for this idea.
Cool.
And basically, just to make it really clear, I'm not saying science isn't the best thing ever. I'm saying it's the best thing for material studies, for understanding matter. But I'm not saying, like a lot of the gurus, the ones you see on TV, the New Agers, which I've never had any truck with New Ageism. They say that consciousness is the primary material and matter is an illusion. And I say, well, tell that to the child who's being abused by their parent. Tell that to the person whose stomach is rumbling on the streets of Mumbai.
Yeah.
It's not an illusion. Matter is not an illusion. But also I'm saying to the Dan Dennett's of this world, please don't tell me that the books you write and the ideas you have in your consciousness are an illusion and that only your brain exists, because it just feels so insane to me that anyone can actually say that through their consciousness. So for me, it just makes sense to have these two aspects. And then what you get suddenly is you get two strands of information at all times to make decisions on. You get matter, which we look at as data, AI, whatever, machine learning, last year's sales figures, engagement studies at work. And then you have this internal information stream, intuition, insight, ideas. Mm-hmm. And every day you get to blend them together and make better decisions.
Well, yeah, and love and connection and happiness.
Exactly.
And all of that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Excellent, excellent. It's one of the things that so the new atheists, my tribe, if you will, one of the mistakes they make, I think, is that when you throw religion out, there's the belief structure of religion, but there's also a number of other goodies that come along with it. And one of the great goodies that comes with religion is community. And you discovered in Africa that, you didn't have the belief structures anymore, but you'd thrown the Judaic community in which you were raised, in a sense, out the window. You'd thrown that part of the tribe out. And so there's a book, which is Sociology of Religion. It's very famous, Religion in Britain, Believing Without Belonging, because only 7% of Brits go to church right now. It's a pretty low number, right? However, it's still above 50%, the number of people who claim to be, in some abstract sense of the word, Christian, believe in quote unquote something, they'll say. And so they've ditched the belonging part, which is participating in a community ritual of worship, of shared experience, of connection, of serving one another, all of that awesome stuff that comes from a religious community. They ditch the good part, which is that, and they hang on to the part which to me is, irrational and illogical and makes no sense. It doesn't help anybody who's lost, which is the theistic part of it, which is kind of like that for me is one of the things that we lose in the West as religion progressively, recedes. I mean, this was predicted in the 17th century, and now in the early 21st century still hasn't happened. But the prediction was that religion would eventually cede its ground to scientism and to a scientific method and to materialism. And so now that hasn't happened nearly as quickly as anybody thought it was going to have. In the United States, I think 97% of the people still say they believe in God. Only 30% go to church. So it's interesting. The baby in the bathwater thing is that there's so many good things that come from organized religion or from organized spirituality or what you're going to call, but not many of them have anything to do with the belief structure. That's just, I suppose, my view. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, totally. So I think the belief structure was a crystal that formed around the truth of belonging. And when I say belonging, I mean both belonging in your community to other human beings.
Yes.
The Ubuntu of Africa, I am because you are.
Yeah.
But also belonging to what I can only call the universe. I don't have any other better word for it. And I know it has a little bit of new agery associations. But the sense of I am part of this one universe. I am part of this reality. Even though I might feel alone and afraid and rejected, as I did from my childhood and my bullying and whatever, it was only when I felt a belonging to the world I live in. And you can think of that as a quantum thing. You can think of it as a globalization. It doesn't really matter how people think about it, as long as you can feel belonging. Because when you feel belonging, I believe that the experience that humans call that sense of connection, we call it love, or we call it community, or care, or compassion. And that's the best bit of all of it. And the challenge I have with the church and state separation, which, of course, I am so grateful that no religious person can get in the way of my healthcare or my education of my children.
Yes.
But when we chased out the church, what we also chased out was meaning and love and connection and compassion. And I think the reason why we now got this upsurge of fanatical evangelical religions is because people have a deep, heartfelt sense, I can't just live in a meaningless, empty universe where the only thing that matters is profit and GDP growth. So part of my book is to say we need love back in the public domain, but absolutely stripped of any dogma, any doctrine, any priesthood, any scripture, anything that has any power imbalance that isn't about my own experience of love and what I want to do compassionately as a politician, as a businessman, whatever it is. And without that, we will keep having this, polarization and extremeness, which is really a major cause of concern, I believe, about the future of our world.
So good, and I don't know, have you read much of either Carl Sagan or some of the sort of more spiritual utterings of Einstein? Because it's quite interesting.
Absolutely. And Niels Bohr and Max Planck.
Yeah, yeah.
And, a lot of these people that, who created the science that we now base pretty much all our technology on.
Yeah. Physics.
They also got to a similar point, which is, some form of connectivity that feels good, feels like we want it, we yearn for it, but no religion.
Yeah, and Einstein
basically
felt that when he contemplated the laws of the universe. And if you listen to or you read any of Carl Sagan's work, you'll find that what he is describing a spiritual experience in purely scientific terms.
Absolutely. I mean, even Bertrand Russell, the old logician, said there's good science. In my words, there's creative and connective science, and there's controlling and protecting and commanding science.
That Bertrand Russell? That doesn't sound like Bertrand Russell to me.
I know. It's in the book, in the chapter on postmodern critiques of science.
Yeah.
And all of my work is set up around these distinctions between these two modes of leadership, two modes of life, which I call control and protect mode and create and connect mode. And there are neurological
correlates.
Yeah, correlates of these things. But we have to be clear that we don't know what causes what, so let's not get into it. And so Bertrand Russell says, there's science that's done in the spirit of openness, of curiosity. He does actually use the word love. This is amazing, right?
Wow.
Arch British philosopher, analytical philosopher. And then science that's done to control and to dominate both nature and other human beings.
So I want to put a bookmark in this for because we're about to change gears and go into sort of leadership and business management and all of that. And I want to put a bookmark in the episode here to say, one of the most important models, I think, that comes out of the book spends a lot of time on philosophy and psychology. It spends almost 9 chapters getting to this concept of the spiritual atheist. And then thereafter, well, the model is introduced very early on, but from a practical, if some of you listening are wondering when we're going to get to the practical stuff, here it is. We begin. Well, it's all practical, but some of it's more practical than others. One of Nick's, I think, great contributions is the control and protect mode and the create and connect mode. So sort of 2 different ways of relating to the world, relating to business leadership, relating to oneself. And so before I want to give you a chance to just kind of illuminate those a little bit, because I think we could usefully spend like 20 minutes talking about those without wasting our time. So what are those 2 modes for listeners?
Brilliant. So some of the scientific work I base this thinking on comes from a neuropsychologist called Rex Jung, very, very leading edge. A lot of research recently into creativity and what happens. And what has emerged from the neuroscience is that there's these 2 modes or these 2 ways of doing problem solving.
Yeah.
One is what I call control and protect mode problem solving. So it's linear problems that we've encountered before. We use existing rules, which we call in business best practice. We rely on habits that we've probably built up for a long time, strengths in leadership that we really know well and have served us really well. That's great. And that's correlated with what the scientists call the executive control network or the cognitive control network in the brain.
Yep.
Then there's this other network called the default mode network, which when I was at medical school didn't exist. Scientists assume if you weren't focused on a problem-solving task, an analytical task,
you weren't doing anything.
The lights were off. There was no brain power. Yep. And then 7-8 years ago, we're like, hold on a minute. As soon as you stop focusing on getting stuff done, this other network switches on, which scientists call quite appositely the daydreaming network, which is all about non-linear problem solving. So new problems that we haven't encountered before, like how do you supply healthcare to 1.4 billion Chinese people, or how to deal with climate change, or how to deal with populism or Brexit or NAFTA agreements. We've got this brain network that's designed for divergent thinking. And I call this create and connect mode. Whereas in control and protect mode, we're very isolated and self-sufficient and we just get on with the task. In create and connect mode, we're curious, we're empathic, we ask questions, we do market research, we do design thinking, we do I wonder if this would happen or what if or all that kind of thinking.
Yeah, so I want to pause. So some of the words associated with create and connect from your model are open, imagining new ways, rule breaking, empathetic, meaning, next practice, and curious. That's to create and connect. And control and protect, the words you associate with are focus, get stuff done. It's rule-based, it's self-contained, using metrics, best practice, and rigorous. All very good stuff. So, yeah,
Exactly.
so carry on. That was just an illumination for people who are listening and going, hey, okay, that's a bookmark.
And so you can find more of these slides from my keynotes and whatever online, some videos. We'll come back to that later, I guess.
Okay,
but
cool.
What I want to make sure we say here, neither mode is good or bad. They're just two different ways of solving problems. The challenge, I think, has come in the modern world. We've been trained very heavily to rely on control and protect mode, best practice, rules, patterns, habits, and we've lost a lot of our capacity for create and connect mode. But when you're 4 years old, you don't have anything other than create and connect mode. You want to play, you want to talk, you want to hug, and you will invent new worlds. And then slowly you get taught how to do a bit more of this, get stuff done, linear, great. But most organizations I work with, and most leaders I work with, are so heavily calibrated to control and protect that they find it very hard to get into the other mode. And what you realize from both practical work and neuroscience is that you can't pretend to be doing innovation. You can't talk innovation if you're in control and protect mode. You just can't think creative thoughts. You can't take risks. You're not curious. But what's interesting about innovation is you don't have to try to innovate. If you get in the right mode and your team in the right mode and your organization in the right mode, then all the things that people say they want at the moment, collaboration, innovation, sustainable thinking, purpose, they boot up naturally on create and connect mode. So the challenge is not about doing innovation. The challenge is about stopping being controlling and commanding and risk averse and shaming people for taking risks, for failing, for sticking their head up above the parapet. That's the challenge. The irony, well, I don't think it's an irony as a spiritual atheist, maybe I'm post-irony, is that the Kabbalistic tradition, so the Jewish spiritual tradition called Kabbalah, the Taoist tradition, which is a sort of mystical Chinese tradition, they both have analogs for these two modes. So for me, that's a perfect example of spiritual atheism. You've got science telling you this, you've got your own lived experience of being in organizations. And I've suggested this model to 50,000 leaders over the last 5-7 years. Everyone gets it immediately, and they use it. They use it in language. They use it in meetings. They use it in organizational redesign. So it's very intuitively right, and it's there in traditions from thousands of years old. Lao Tzu talking about different modes of thought, modes of being human.
Yeah, it's a dual boot operating system. You can either boot Windows or you can boot Ubuntu.
Yes. You can say Windows or Apple, and I don't know if that's that. I think 20 years ago that would have been a good metaphor. I'm not sure anymore. We got Windows and Windows.
So there's business people that are still sort of rolling their eyes when you're talking about the Tao Te Ching and you're talking about this and you're talking about connection. So why should, to use our British metaphor, why should a hairy arse business person care about this create and connect stuff? I mean, look, Peter Drucker, right? For some people, the most revered original leadership and management theorist started writing in the 1960s or something like that. In my mind, one of the most overrated people ever in the history of Western thought. One of the things Drucker said was what gets measured gets managed. And it's one of these things that people throw around at business meetings, consultants throw that shit around. I think it's pure bollocks. And I think listening to you, you probably agree. Because what we're saying here, what you're saying in the spiritual atheist is, yes, what gets measured gets managed. There's some of course, truth to that. But a lot of the important shit that gets, creativity, innovation, creation, building relationships, building teams, building empathy, building, relationships with people, all of that stuff doesn't get measured, but that doesn't mean you don't have to manage it. Now, some people object to the management word. Maybe manage is the wrong word. Maybe it's paying attention to, or maybe it's nurturing, or there's some other word for it that's not managing, because that sounds very like control and protect to me. But we need to pay, if I'm listening to you correctly, equal attention to create and connect. And that's the stuff that can't be measured objectively and empirically and all of that kind of good stuff. And so we need a space. Right. We need in our meetings or in our organizations, we need to be unafraid to boot up this alternative operating system when we need it. Yeah? Is that something like your thesis?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if just for 1 hour a week with your team, you go, for the next hour, we're going to be curious about our customers. We're going to imagine stuff. We're going to make it safe. That's enough to start shifting away from this ever faster, goal-oriented control and protect mode. But also, to speaking to what you just said, I make a clear distinction. In control and protect mode, we manage people. And that's important. We want efficient outputs. For our inputs, we want process. We want things to not waste time and money. And listen, as a business that probably goes too far to create and connect mode, my own business, I know how important having good control and protect mode thinking is. Good process, good systems, good tools, good apps, good people managing. But if we only manage, we don't lead, and we need leadership. And every business I know I've met in the last 10 years, there's a crisis of leadership, essentially. So now I'm going to give you the business case for leadership, real leadership, not management plus.
And isn't it funny that we're about to give the business case for love, and the business case for empathy, and the business case for meaning, and the business case for curiosity, and the business case for openness? But that's the way we think about things in the world today, right? We think about education that way. There's some justification to think about healthcare that way because it's a very empirical sort of thing. But now we're about to try, in a sense, defend, create, and connect in control and protect terms, because that's the language of our culture. So anyway, so you're going to do it. So you're going to give me the metric.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it on. But I just want to note that off every keynote I give, I get someone asking me, a control and protect question. I go, I love it, because that's just, this is the whole thing. Control and protect wants the business case. It wants the data on leadership. It wants the data. And the great news is we're getting more and more of that data from pioneering scientists looking at leadership and innovation. Very hard to measure. You've got to take the results with a pinch of salt, but there's definitely indicative of, so I often use a bit of research showing that inspired employees are 120% more productive than satisfied employees. So there's that kind of business case out there. So here's my 3 reasons why you need to get in create and connect mode more as a leader and as a business. Let's do it. Number 1, the digital age. The 4th industrial revolution is hitting. If it hasn't already disrupted you, it will very soon. What I mean by that is AI, robotics, 3D printing, chatbots, all this stuff, cryptocurrencies, whatever, it's blockchain, it's all happening. No business is insulated from this disruption. It's going to change everything, and no one person understands it all. We can't even envisage what we might do. So on that point alone, every organization has to adapt really quickly. Most organizations don't know how to innovate, don't know how to adapt, because they've done 100 years of the same business model, sometimes 200 years. I work in the built environment, in energy, same business model for 200 years. It's about to change, whatever happens. So if you can't adapt, if you use best practice over and over again to solve new, unforeseen problems, you're going to fail. The business is going to go down. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Second driver, you've got different customers and different employees than you've ever had before. These millennials, the Gen Z, they don't necessarily want promotion and a better title. They want collaboration projects. They want to experiment and do innovation. They want to do meaningful work and purposeful work. If you can't give them that, you're going to get the second-rate talent, which is going to cause even more problems with your bigger issue around AI and technology disrupting you out of the market. So in order to inspire and empower and bring on the talent of the future, who, in brackets, are also your customers of the future, you have to be able to adapt and innovate and bring them along and give them meaning and give them a sense of safety. Third reason, we're about to be hit by a cataclysm of stressed ecosystems, environmental systems. We've got poverty going up in the UK and the US, and no one seems to be able to have any idea how we're going to solve it when the public sector is retreating from the space, less money than ever been before. We've got climate change. We've got terror, conflict, resource scarcity. We've got so much stress coming online that, again, we're all going to have to rethink our business models, our operating models, and deal with that. These are the 3 things. I call them the triple threat. And so in order to engage with this triple threat, we can either get scared and get into even more best practice. And the joke I make is when managers get scared, they just retreat into spreadsheets where they can create the perfect spreadsheet and feel like a little bit of a win, but the rest around them, the world's in chaos. If you don't want to do that, you want to be able to adapt and dance with this chaotic world and create value for your customers in the future, you're going to have to get in create and connect mode, not just 1 hour a week, but more regularly than that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're getting to. And if you want to be a master at bringing a team along, letting them feel that they can take risks and fail and innovate big ideas, you have to get really good at your own consciousness as a leader. And that's where the sort of dual aspect model comes in again. You've got to boost up your consciousness. And no organization can outperform the consciousness of its leaders. This is a wonderful thing.
So here's what's just happened, right? So we started with Nick Jankel, teenage boy, having a rift with the religion of his birth, Judaism. We traveled,
putting on some weight.
Yeah, we traveled then into the world of Freud and the explorations of, psychological distress, if you will. We went to Africa and we learned the power of community. We learned the power of being in a body, of having bodily experience that you can't understand rationally. We go to Cambridge, we go to medical school, we go to Silicon Valley. We're learning about innovation. We're learning about business. We're learning about that. And then and I'm just kind of sharing the journey with, potential readers of the book here. We do all that kind of inner stuff. And then we get to, what does that mean for a worldview? What's a possible worldview? And you posit a worldview, which is called spiritual atheist, which holds that on the one side of the thing, we have science, which is great at understanding the world. It's great at understanding cause and effect. And, your loyalty and dedication and love of science is evident. But then there's this other side that we can't make sense of through this materialist worldview, which is the world of love and meaning and community and empathy and curiosity and openness. And that, you put that together in a worldview in chapter 9. And then we're going, well, all right, how do you translate that into business? So that's the next sort of chapter, if you will. You have control and protect versus create and connect. And now what we've just done is taking that and said, well, what are the problems that that's going to solve in the real world? 3 problems. Not problems, opportunities, whatever they are: artificial intelligence, breakthrough technologies, and transformation of our technological world, transformation of our cultural world with millennials and people who are hungry for some of this empathy and meaning and connection and purpose at work. And the third thing, we've got destruction of the biosphere and that. So we've taken this kind of very inner journey. This is for listeners or potential readers or participants, and taken that inner journey, applied it to leadership, applied it to organizations, and then applied it to, some planetary outcomes, if you will. And so I just want to share with readers, like, my sense is like, wow, 250 pages. Right? I mean, it is replete with it's just like eating, it's almost like too much chocolate cake, right? The 40th bite is like, oh my God, hold up. It's very, very rich. And so I just want to invite my listeners and potential readers of The Spiritual Atheist to sort of get a sense of what you're going to get into. For some people, that'll be an exciting journey. For some, it'll be exhausting. But I think for everybody, it'll be an illuminating journey. So I just want to kind of bookmark that there. Nice job, buddy.
I just want to bottle what you just said of a 2-minute script description of my book, and I might have to transpose it and put it on Amazon, because that's a brilliant book blurb from you. I mean, that's just like genius. I'm just in awe of your digestion of my book and bringing out the themes.
My ex-wife, who as you can imagine, is not always full of, her, Carrie Caldwell. Do you know my ex-wife, Carrie Caldwell, through Facebook or through Marsh Walsh or through
I don't know.
dogmatic stuff or anything like that? She's a cool lady. She's a very cool lady. We have the best divorce on the history of Western marriage. I mean, we get along. We have a highly, highly functional divorce. But anyway, one of the nice things she said about me, there were never too many, but one of the nice things she said about me is that one of the things my mind does incredibly well, she says, is knit together the sort of macro and the micro. And, again, taking a 250-page book and summarizing it in a sentence without losing all meaning. She said, you're world class at that. So that's one of the nicest things. That's one of the nice things that the ex will say about me. There aren't too many of them. That may be all of them.
That's the full list. Oh my God! As a divorced man, I fully empathize in full create and connect mode with that reality.
Actually, you have a new wife, and one of the things you talked about when we had informal discussions is one of the things that was a rift in my relationship with my ex is that she was deep into the spiritual world. I mean, there's almost nothing she doesn't believe in, right? She's very much a kind of crystal and a Reiki and alternative this and alternative that and all things alternative. And when she was heading in that direction, I was heading in this sort of materialist direction or the atheist direction or whatever you want to call it or something like that. It became very serious. But you have that in your marriage, like how, this is an interesting question for business people too, right? Because in business, you'll have people who are all create and connect, and, the kind of the dark side of that is that you can get very woo, and then you can get people who are all control and protect. And the dark side of that is they're very empiricist and they don't acknowledge that anything like meaning or love or empathy or connection or innovation or creativity exists. So how do you do that in a marriage? I mean, without going into fucking therapy, but it's got practical real world things. Is how do people with different worldviews? I don't know how different your world, but how do they communicate? What's the bridge there? How do you do that?
Well, I'll give you just one extra bit of piquancy to this question. I actually co-develop a lot of my methodology for transformation with my wife, and we share a stage regularly as co-presenters and co-facilitators. We've had to actually agree what we actually believe and what we don't. because I can't have someone on stage talking about crystals and patchouli and drinking your own weed while I'm trying to change the world and help, global multinationals transform their businesses. So,
Right.
so what we've come down to is this: we both are in furious agreement of these two modes. We're in furious agreement that science is awesome and that inner subjectivity is awesome. And a bit like the Buddha said, other than that, everything's speculation, and we don't have to speculate on stage. We just give people what works. We give them what we call the switch-on methodology, and it works. And it works for individuals, it works for parents, it works for corporations.
That's what the Buddha said. He says, if you got an arrow in your heart, he says, you don't talk about like the whys and the wherefores and how I got there and what the arrow might be made of. You pull the sucker out. That's not a direct quote.
And that's actually a really perfect metaphor for the pain that we're in as individuals, in our relationships and in our organizations. There's an arrow in our heart, right? So let's get the arrow out. That's the methodology. That's what I sell. That's what I present and promote. If you then get me out for dinner afterwards, I'm delighted to speculate. Love a bit of philosophical speculation, but I never want anyone to mean that they have to think what I think, or, the methodology and the speculation are separate. Where the rubber hits the road for this woo-woo new age sort of worldview and my worldview, which are not the same, by the way. I just want to make it really clear. I don't do any of the new age stuff. I don't dress new age. I don't do new age colors on my wall. I don't think it makes a jot of difference to your spirituality or your character or your compassion. It's an aesthetic choice. Go for it. Have a Buddha in your garden. It looks great. But that doesn't mean you're going to act from compassion every day when your child wakes you up at 4 a.m. They're distinct.
You remember the guy from Silicon Valley? You remember the guru guy, the guru coach from Silicon Valley? That was all in saffron and robes and all of that. He was the chief executive coach. You're not him.
Exactly. I'm not him. I'm a Brit, for God's sake. We can't do all that. Can't wear saffron. So when you get down to it, one of the core things I'm saying in spiritual atheism is data's great. Let's use the data to know what might happen next. Predictive analytics, whatever you want to do. Let's get that data. Then we also want to bring in a second form of information that I call intuition, which is a sense, a felt sense, a deep knowing of what is the right thing to do. The old analogy, management does things right, leadership does the right thing. So we want to bring that intuition in. We don't want to pretend it's not there. And actually, wonderfully, there's a bit of research that's come out that city traders on Wall Street and in the city of London, those that use both data and intuition outperform those that use one or the other. So that's, for me, a really good bit of evidence for this dual information flow. So I will call that thing intuition. I believe you can refine it. Not just that, I believe you have to refine it, because if you don't refine it and test it and work on it, it often comes out as anger and frustration, and that's not intuition. That's a different information source. That's protection. That's control and protect mode again. So for me, create and connect mode is intuition. And my wife, who's from California, have lived in California. I hope to live again in California one day. It's a wonderful part of the world. She's from California, and she does believe that when she hears intuition, it's actually entities, a spirit guide, whatever you want to call it.
Right. I'd be rolling my eyes.
I can allow her metaphor, which I think of as a metaphor. She probably thinks it's not as a metaphor. She thinks it's actual truth. But what we've agreed as the co-creators of this transformation methodology is it doesn't matter a jot whether that's a dolphin, a spirit guide, the voice of Plato, or my own little tickly sense in my gut. What matters is it bringing more connection and creativity into this moment? And do you therefore listen to it and not just look at the data, not just listen to the protection and the controlling voice inside you? That's it. So that's how that's how I go into the world. Intuition's important. I don't really care what you call that thing.
Yeah.
I just call that you learn how to refine yours and make sure it isn't what I call instinct, which is usually survival, fight, flee, protect. And that's a lifelong discernment as a leader. What's intuition? What's instinct?
I'm smiling. I got such a huge smile on my face because last week I was on a date with a woman from Boulder, which is perhaps the energetic new age mecca of the entire world. And she said that, I think she said she was a being that she was not a human being. She was an alien being. Maybe she was in contact with spirit guides and spirit beings that were around her at all time. And, my eyes rolled or something like that. I said, but, I was on a first date, so I didn't want to be an asshole. So I said, well, that's a very interesting metaphor. She says, it's not a metaphor. But it was actually really interesting. But anyway, there you go. You found a way through.
But the thing for me is, you can have a great relationship with her as long as when her spirit guide tells her what to do, whatever it is, that it's actually in service of your intimacy, your love, and a better, more just social existence.
Yeah.
If it isn't, it's missed the point, and it's probably just bullshit. So I think you can live in different belief systems as long as you're operating in the mode that fits the moment.
Well, we're going to leave it there, because the world operating across different belief systems, whether that's Islam and Christianity, or whether that's capitalism and socialism, or whether that's evangelical Christianity in the United States and Trump populism, or social justice warrior, the operating across different ideologies, different worldviews, different systems is really something that I think as a culture, as a world, we have not yet learned to do. I think we can underline that. So, buddy, I want to give people a chance to do a little business with you. If you don't want to do a little business with you, where can they find you? Where can they find the book? Where can they find your TED Talks or your keynote speeches? Where can they find your consulting firm? Like, give us the 411, as we say in the United States.
I love it. It's one of the things I love about America is you just get a chance to say this stuff. In England, you have to pretend you're not actually trying to sell something somewhere along the line.
I know. God forbid we should sell something in England, right?
God forbid I should eat tonight, as as a Jewish person might say. God forbid I should put food on my child's table. Anyway, so the book's called Spiritual Atheist. It's in Amazon. It's actually trending #1 for 4 weeks in philosophy, which is very exciting. So my company is called Switch On. The website switchonnow.com. And really everything's there. You can find some free downloads. There's a book of breakthrough innovation, 80-page book, illustrated, totally for free. You can find talks, videos, keynotes. I love doing keynotes. I don't talk about the S word in my keynotes unless I'm asked.
Is that sex?
Sex or spirituality?
We don't talk about either.
Exactly. And I can really pack a punch in a keynote. So if you're interested in that, please get involved. And most of my work is in leadership development. So if that's something you're interested in doing, transformational leadership, the leadership of adaptation and innovation in a fast-changing world, using intuition and creativity and curiosity and all that good stuff. Also have a YouTube channel, loads of videos on there about different forms of leadership, different talks, bits of crazy ecstatic dancing from our workshop in China. A melange of spiritual atheism. Go there too. And Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Follow me on Instagram as well. Nick Jankel, Switch On. Yeah, get connected.
That's lovely, mate. Thanks a lot. We have an expression that we use sometimes in America, my brother from another mother. And definitely that's the way I relate to you, man. My brother from another mother.
Definitely. I feel
it. So that's been amazing, an amazing tour for people. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks, Nick, for being here. Stick around. I've got some stuff on contemporary culture coming up, my little chit-chat on what's going on in the world of contemporary culture. Thanks for listening, Nick. Take care of yourself, mate. Oh, and hi, everybody. And this is the end of the show. I'm going to talk for about a minute about what's going on in the world of contemporary culture, a little bit about what's going on in my life. I'm releasing this, would you believe, on my 58th birthday, which sounds to me like it's just ridiculously ancient to me. Just cannot imagine that I'm actually 58, but here I am. I'm off to Martha's Vineyard to hobnob with the deplorable globalist elites for the weekend. I've started doing this funny thing. I'm sure you've heard about it, the keto diet. I started messing around with my diet after writing a chapter section on gluten and wheat-free diets for Truth Wars. And as you can imagine, I start pretty skeptical on all that stuff. However, I've lost 12 pounds in 10 days, which means I can run further at the gym, and I might even start dating again. When I feel super heavy, I cannot either bring myself to run or to date. So it's kind of an interesting experiment. On the culture front, I'm listening to the new Eminem, the new Logic, and Lil Wayne. And I'm really listening to Elgar at the moment. And I've got a little of Elgar playing in the background. It's making me feel very, very British. And I do apologize, for those of you who sometimes I talk like I'm from the hood and sometimes I talk like I'm from Oxford. And as you heard with my friend Nick, when I was doing the show with him, I revert back to my English accent when I'm talking to English people, which must be very weird and disconcerting from some of you. And on the movie front, I am just really desperate for Hollywood to release something halfway decent sometime. I feel like it's been a really, really dark summer for movies, but the only thing that I have to recommend, the only, I think, memorable movie from the summer is The Black Klansman. The rest of the current run of movies are pretty shite. But the Black Klansman is certainly something that we'll be talking about and remembering for a very long time. So I do recommend that you go out and see it. And that's all for me. Now, thank you for listening. Wish me a happy birthday, will you, on my Facebook Think Bigger, Think Better page or whatever. And I look forward to talking to you all next week. To celebrate the launch of the show, and to thank you all for listening, I'm going to be giving away books. Lots and lots of books. All you have to do is leave a review in iTunes. We're going to raffle off a book every single week for 12 weeks. So head on over to paulgibbons.net/iTunes to get easy-to-follow directions and let me know the title of your review to make sure that you're entered to win. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Think Bigger, Think Better. Great ideas are great, but this isn't gospel. Share your critical thinking in the comments. Where do I disagree? What insights were most powerful? If you got value, don't forget to share the value by sharing the podcast. Finally, to get information on book and blog releases and new video content, head over to paulgibbons.net and join the community of thinkers talking about using science and philosophy to make our world a better place.